Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, September 16th, 2024. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us today. President Biden and House Speaker Mike Johnson said today the Secret Service needs to do more to protect former President Trump following the attempt on his life yesterday. Meanwhile, the man the FBI says made that attempt appeared in court for the first time today. He's been charged with 2 counts of illegal gun possession. Chinese company ByteDance had their day in federal court over the law that orders them to sell their social media app TikTok or face a ban in the U.S. Attorney Andrew Pincus said that the law unconstitutionally bans free speech, while Justice Department Attorney Daniel Tenney said that law does not target protected expression. We'll hear parts of today's oral argument coming up. Congress is back to work this week, facing an end-of-the-month government funding deadline. Bloomberg government's Jonathan Tamari will give us the state of the talks on a continuing resolution that would avert a government shutdown. FBI, Justice Department, and Secret Service officials talked to reporters about the assassination attempt on former President Trump this afternoon. But here's what the president said about it on the White House South Lawn this morning.
Thank God the president's okay. I think we got a full report so far. We're down there tonight. But one thing I want to make clear, the service needs more help. And I think the Congress should respond to their needs if they, in fact, need more services. So that's what we're going to be talking about.
Are you concerned with they need more personnel? They need more money? What kind of help do you say?
I think we need some more personnel. I think they're deciding whether they need more personnel or not.
Are you concerned about more personnel?
Vice President Harris shared a statement about Sunday's incidents. She said she was deeply disturbed by the event and that she was glad the former president is okay. She added, quote, "As we gather the facts, I will be clear, I condemn political violence. We all must do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence." Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson was in Florida on Sunday to meet with the former president when the shooting occurred.
My wife Kelly and I were on the way to Mar-a-Lago when the shooting occurred, and so we were delayed a little bit because they shut down all the traffic, but then we arrived there about the time that President Trump did. We spent about 3 hours with him. He was in very good spirits, as you might expect. That's who he is. He's so resilient, and we were really grateful to see him. You know, I said this, and we'll all be talking about this for quite some time. There's no leader in the history of America that has been so attacked and has remained so strong and so resilient. He's one of a kind. He is not going to stop fighting for the American people, and it was really encouraging for us to sit and visit with him right after that happened.
Mr. Speaker, I know your faith is very important to you, and after the first assassination attempt, what was it, 65 days ago, Donald Trump said it was providential, that he happened to turn his head at the right moment and look at that board, which normally he plays at the end of his rallies. But he said he felt like God was with him during that. Was he mentioning anything like that? I mean, this is the second time someone has tried to take his life. That has to be pretty jarring.
It is. It's a remarkable thing, and Kelly and I spoke with him at great length about that because it is something that no one can deny. God has spared his life twice now, and I told him that it reminded me of the bulletproof George Washington, our first president, who evaded being shot when he was an Army colonel, the famous incident in the French and Indian War, where they all took shots at him and bullet holes went through his jacket and it didn't take him down. That event took place, ironically, less than 50 miles from where President Trump was shot on the stage at Butler, Pennsylvania. These things aren't accidents. It's not luck. I believe it's providence, and we talked about that. It's a remarkable thing. It would move any man's heart. I think it's moved the president's, and it's just something he's processing right now.
And while Speaker Johnson praised the work of Secret Service agents on the scene, he said the agency needs more support.
You know, you saw him compliment online yesterday the Secret Service that are protecting him now. I got a briefing from the acting director of the Secret Service, Ron Rowe, within 90 minutes of the event. I was actually sitting with President Trump when he called. We listened to that in detail. And what I understand happened is that those agents that were with him yesterday saw that barrel of that gun between the bushes on a golf course. I mean, you know, that's a difficult thing to spot.
Right.
Thankfully, they did. But unlike in Butler, they did not pause. They immediately pulled their weapons and fired. I think that's why this guy, the suspect, the shooter, threw the gun in the bushes and ran. Had they not been there, Had they not acted so quickly and so decisively, we might be having a different conversation today. President Trump needs the most coverage of anyone. He's the most attacked. He's the most threatened, even probably more than when he was in the Oval Office. So we are demanding in the House that he have every asset available, and we will make more available if necessary. I don't think it's a funding issue. I think it's a manpower allocation.
Couple of things. Number one, Lindsey Graham brought up yesterday, it's time to spin off the Secret Service where it was. Back to Treasury, got more attention, was able to focus. It's swallowed up by Homeland Security. Number two, to get to the higher levels of Secret Service into college education. We got Navy SEALs coming back at 31 years old, who are ready to go, and they're out of the military. And yet, if they don't have that college degree, they're not able to guard the president. Can we make some adjustments into the people that can get into those ranks?
Brian, desperate times call for desperate measures. We will look at all those things. As you know, I put together a task force in the immediate wake of the Butler, Pennsylvania, the shocking failures, lapses in security there. There are hearings coming up this month for that's task force, and of course the Senate has its own Homeland Security committee looking into it as well. There's going to be reports and recommendations coming forward, and Congress will act swiftly. We need accountability. We must demand that this job is being done. I think there are some really patriotic, great people working in the Secret Service, but it's the leadership. We have no faith. I have no faith in Secretary Mayorkas, Department of Homeland Security. He's an abject failure. We impeached him in the House, as you know, but Chuck Schumer made it die in the Senate. So we've got to get accountability. We're working on it every day, and President Trump deserves every measure of that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson on Fox and Friends. And now to this afternoon's press conference, here's U.S. Secret Service Acting Director Ronald Rowe.
Yesterday afternoon, this country was reminded of the heightened and dynamic threat environment the United States Secret Service and its protectees face on a daily basis. Immediately following the assassination attempt of former President Donald J. Trump on July 13th, the Secret Service moved to increase assets to an already enhanced security posture for the former president. In the days that followed, President Biden made it clear that he wanted the highest levels of protection for former President Trump and for Vice President Harris. The Secret Service moved to sustain increases in assets and the level of protection sought. And those things were in place yesterday. At approximately 1:30 p.m., former President Trump was playing golf during an off-the-record movement to the Trump International Golf Course. A Secret Service advance agent supporting the front edge of the agency's layered approach to protection encountered an individual attempting to secrete himself in the woodline. This happened, the alleged gunman was on the public side of the fence near the 6th green. A layered approach of security is integral to the Secret Service's protective methodologies, and it's also the key to our success. As former President Trump was moving through the 5th fairway across the course and out of sight of the 6th green, the agent, who was visually sweeping the area of the 6th green, saw the subject armed with what he perceived to be a rifle and immediately discharged his firearm. The subject, who did not have line of sight to the former president, fled the scene. He did not fire or get off any shots at our agent. With reports of gunfire, the former president's close protection detail immediately evacuated the president to a safe location. The protective methodologies of the Secret Service were effective yesterday. The former president's protective apparatus allowed for the early identification of the threat and led to a safe evacuation. The increased assets directed by President Biden were in place yesterday. These included the counter-sniper team elements, counter-surveillance agents on the exterior, counter-assault teams partnered with local tactical assets from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and counter-unmanned aerial system elements. All of these entities were present yesterday. And while all of these assets were in place, as I've said publicly, we must satisfy the basic requirements of the Secret Service's protective methodologies. In partnership with local law enforcement, we did just that. And the agents' hypervigilance and the detailed swift action was textbook. And I commend them and our partners for an exemplary response in keeping former President Trump safe. And I will tell you, having served in local law enforcement in Palm Beach County, I can state that I am tremendously impressed and appreciative for all of the efforts of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Snyder with the Martin County Sheriff's Office. But what was critical to this was the quick reaction, the response, the hypervigilance of the men and women of the United States Secret Service, who since July 13th have been rising to meet an unprecedented and hyper-dynamic threat environment. And they are rising to this moment, and I could not be more proud of them and the way they have executed, not only yesterday, but what they're doing today and what they are doing tomorrow and what they will always do because it is their duty. Thank you.
U.S. Secret Service Acting Director Ronald Rowe. U.S. Attorney Mackenzie LaPointe outlined the charges filed against the accused gunman.
We're here to announce that Ryan Wesley Routh, 58 years old, of Hawaii, has been charged by a criminal complaint in the Southern District of Florida with firearms offenses related to an incident which occurred yesterday at Trump International Golf Course right here in West Palm Beach. Routh was charged federally with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon and possession and receipt of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. He had his initial appearance today before Magistrate Judge Ryan McCabe in the federal courthouse in West Palm Beach. According to the allegations in the complaint, a U.S. Secret Service agent walking the golf course perimeter saw what appeared to be a rifle poking out of the tree line. After the agent fired a service weapon in the direction of the rifle, a witness saw a man later identified as Routh fleeing the area in the tree line. Routh was later apprehended by officers from the Martin County Sheriff's Office in coordination with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. The complaint alleges that in the area of the tree line from which Routh fled, agents found a digital camera, a backpack, a loaded SKS-style rifle with a scope, and a black plastic bag containing food. The serial number on the rifle was obliterated. According to the complaint, Routh was convicted of felonies in North Carolina in December 2002 and March 2010, and therefore was prohibited from possessing a firearm. The FBI is leading this investigation, this ongoing investigation. As the Attorney General stated earlier today, the FBI is continuing its investigation of this incident as an assassination attempt upon the former president.
According to CNN, Ryan Wesley Routh owns a construction company in Hawaii, and NBC News reports that court records show more than 100 criminal counts have been filed against him in North Carolina. Those include a 2002 incident where police arrested Mr. Routh following a 3-hour armed standoff inside a local business in Greensboro. Mr. Routh was apprehended yesterday in Martin County, Florida, and its sheriff, William Snyder, his deputies made the arrest. Sheriff Snyder said he wonders how the suspect would be able to target the former president's last-minute golf plans.
To my knowledge, does he have any ties to Martin County? I think the answer, to my knowledge, the answer is no, I have no knowledge. I think what we're finding out is he's not from this area, which of course raises the bigger question is, how does a guy from not here get all the way to Trump International, realize that the president, former president of the United States is golfing, and is able to get a rifle in that vicinity? I think that's the question the FBI, the Secret Service are laser focused on today. Is this guy part of a conspiracy? Is he a lone gunman? If he's a lone gunman, President Trump is that much safer because we have him. But if he's part of a conspiracy, then this whole thing really takes on a very ominous tone.
A detention hearing for Mr. Routh is set for next Monday. He will remain in jail while awaiting trial. Back here in Washington, talks continued this weekend after Speaker Mike Johnson's bill to fund the government past the end of the month was pulled from the House floor due to a lack of support. The House is scheduled to return to legislative work tomorrow. The Senate was in session today following Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's announcement yesterday that he'll hold a second vote on a measure that seeks to protect and expand access to in vitro fertilization. During Leader Time remarks today, he talked about the attempt on former President Trump's life and that IVF bill.
Yesterday afternoon, I spoke with Secret Service Acting Director Rowe after an armed suspect was arrested after fleeing from former President Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. I will say what I have said many times before. There is no place in America for political violence of any kind. I'm glad the former president is safe, and I applaud the Secret Service and all first responders for acting quickly before anyone got hurt. As for the perpetrator, he should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We all must do our part to ensure an incident like this does not happen again. This means that Congress has a responsibility to ensure the Secret Service and all law enforcement have the resources they need to do their jobs. So as we continue the appropriations process, if the Secret Service is in need of more resources, we are prepared to providing it for them, possibly in the upcoming funding agreement. Now on IVF. 2 years ago, Donald Trump and the MAGA Supreme Court succeeded in overturning Roe and ripping away the right to choose for millions of Americans. This year, as we have seen in states like Alabama, the hard right has its sights on a new target, IVF. So tomorrow, the Senate will take up Senator Duckworth, your bill, Madam President, Senator Duckworth's bill, the Right to IVF Act, to establish a nationwide right to IVF and make it easier for people to access this vital treatment. This is the very same legislation that almost every single Senate Republican voted against earlier this summer. This past weekend in New York, I stood with some amazing families and some amazing parents and their beautiful baby, a miracle of IVF, to say that we Democrats will do everything we can to protect access to IVF. And I hope that in this chamber we'll be joined by our Republican colleagues when we vote tomorrow, because tomorrow we will take up Senator Duckworth's Right to IVF Act. The vast majority of Americans support requiring insurance plans to cover IVF treatments. And I bet every one of us knows someone who has struggled with infertility at one point or another. In my own family, IVF was the answer to our prayers. I have a beautiful grandchild, thanks to the miracle of IVF. And I could not bear to imagine the pain we'd feel if we'd been told, sorry, you're out of luck.
Meanwhile, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell talked about Sunday's incident.
It's dismaying to begin another week with news of an assassination attempt against the former president. We're certainly all grateful, once again, that the worst outcome was avoided. This ought to be a moment of soul-searching for all Americans. It's a time to reflect on the ways that our political process has been injected by reprehensible violence. In America, our democracy flows from the ballot box, not from the barrel of a gun, period. In the meantime, for the second time in as many months, law enforcement faces an even more urgent task, completing a thorough, swift, and transparent investigation into the circumstance of yesterday's close call. The American people deserve answers. They deserve assurance that a former president who tens of millions of Americans have nominated once again will receive every appropriate measure of security, and they ought to receive them without delay.
And again, that government funding deadline just 2 weeks away. Jonathan Tamari from Bloomberg Government says House Republicans are not unified on a government funding proposal.
They don't seem to be right now. They haven't been able to rally their caucus or their conference around a bill to get to fund the government beyond September 30th. There's a lot of disputes about how long this bill should be, whether people will vote for it at all, whether it should last till December, whether it should last till March, whether it should be attached to different policies on immigration, or if it should just be a clean funding bill that gets this done and avoids a disaster before the election. So they haven't been able to get together yet. It's been a recurring theme throughout this Congress. The House Republicans have a very small majority, and they've had a hard time keeping it together.
So this CR, where does it stand now? Because Speaker Johnson had had a bill and then pulled it when he found that he wasn't going to have enough votes.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially in the same place we were a week ago. That is the proposal. That's the only proposal that's on the table right now. Speaker Johnson says that he's going to fight for it. He's talked about, this SAVE Act, which is a bill that requires proof of citizenship when you register to vote. He's talked about that as being something really important. He's talked about wanting to have any CR last into March as being very important to him, because the Republicans don't want to get stuck at the end of the year with a last-minute omnibus bill that we see very frequently at the end of each year. But he hasn't been able to get the votes for it. But he also hasn't proposed an alternative. So we're kind of waiting and watching. The end game seems pretty obvious, I think, that at some point there's a compromise, and it's probably a short-term bill, because that's what Senate Democrats and Republicans seem to want. But we're kind of still waiting to move through the process to get there.
Short-term and clean CR?
I think that's most likely. I mean, Senate Democrats want that, the White House wants that, and most Senate Republicans are kind of there as well, or at least a significant chunk of them, if not most. So you have a lot of people on the same page, and then just the House Republican Conference that's kind of on an island right now.
All right, and let's take a look at what the SAVE Act is. It stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. It requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in a federal election. It passed the House in July 221 to 198. All Republicans and 5 Democrats voted in favor. No Senate votes are planned as yet, and it was introduced by Representative Chip Roy of Texas. What's the opposition on the Democratic side to the SAVE Act?
So there's a few things. First, they say that on principle, you shouldn't be able to hold government funding hostage to pass a policy priority that you couldn't get otherwise. That funding the government is a basic responsibility. You don't attach other asks to that. And even some of the Democrats who voted for the bill the first time around say they won't vote for it under these circumstances. More broadly, they point out that it's already illegal to vote if you're an undocumented immigrant. So they're already not allowed to vote, and there's not any evidence that this happens with any significance, with any, in any numbers that can make a real difference in an election. So they're saying that it's basically gratuitous and unnecessary, and the kind of thing that, in the Democrats' view, would discourage voting or kind of discourage people from registering to vote.
I want to show you the headline from the Wall Street Journal. It says that Trump calls for government shutdown if voting laws aren't changed.
Yeah.
I mean, is that the policy for a lot of Republicans, that it's okay to shut down the government? Are they willing to own that in a sense?
There's probably a small segment of Republicans that are willing to shut down the government, but I don't think it's the majority. And I think we've seen over the years there have been enough Republicans who are willing to defy Trump on this kind of issue, whether it's the debt ceiling or shutting down the government, that there's enough votes to get a funding bill through. There are a number of Republicans who are in swing districts. They do not want to have a shutdown this close to Election Day. They think that would be, just a terrible sign of Republicans' governance and their ability to hold the House. So they don't want to do it. There's a lot of institutionalist Republicans, particularly in the Senate, who also want to fund the government. They think it's a basic responsibility. And so I think there's a lot of bluster. I think there will be a lot of Republicans who vote against it, but know that the votes are there to vote for it. I think it's only a very small sliver who are actually rooting for a government shutdown at this point.
Bloomberg government senior Congress reporter Jonathan Tamari on Washington Journal this morning. Now, on the Senate's agenda for today, a confirmation vote for Kevin Ritz to be a judge on the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. On the House agenda, starting tomorrow, a bill to prevent foreign interference in U.S. elections by blocking foreign money from being sent to tax-exempt organizations to influence the American political system, and a bill to reauthorize funding for Health and Human Services traumatic brain injury programs to 2029. That is one of the last bills authored by the late New Jersey Congressman Bill Pascrell, who died last month. You can see the House live when it returns on C-SPAN, the Senate on C-SPAN 2, and get all of our congressional coverage at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Since 1979, in partnership with the cable industry, C-SPAN has provided complete coverage of the halls of Congress, from the House and Senate floors to congressional hearings, party briefings, and committee meetings. C-SPAN gives you a front row seat to how issues are debated and decided, with no commentary, no interruptions, and completely unfiltered. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Lawyers for the social media app TikTok were in court fighting against a federal law that could put the app out of business in the U.S. Here's part of the oral argument. You'll hear TikTok's lawyer Andrew Pincus and Court of Appeals Judge Sri Srinivasan.
The law before this court is unprecedented, and its effect would be staggering. For the first time in history, Congress has expressly targeted a specific U.S. speaker, banning its speech and the speech of 170 million Americans. The law is subject to strict scrutiny, and the government bears the burden of proving its constitutionality. Its arguments fail as a matter of law for two fundamental reasons. First, the government's asserted interest in addressing what it calls content manipulation is facially illegitimate. Speech regulations cannot be justified on content or viewpoint grounds, and the gross under-inclusiveness of the data security interest fatally undermines it as a standalone justification. Second, this law is just like the one invalidated by this court in News America. No compelling reason justifies Congress acting like an enforcement agency and specifically targeting petitioners. Congress excluded petitioners and only petitioners from the more protective general standard that the executive branch must apply to every other speaker it seeks to classify as a national security risk. This law imposes extraordinary speech prohibition based on indeterminate future risks, notwithstanding the obvious less restrictive alternatives. The government has not come anywhere near satisfying strict scrutiny.
So one matter in the case that you didn't mention, as far as I could detect in that, is the fact that the initial operative instance of the law is predicated on the idea that the curation is occurring abroad. So it's a foreign entity abroad who's engaging in the curation that's causing the content manipulation that you highlighted. How does that factor into the analysis from your perspective? Because I think that the government's point is, sure, you've got your point about content moderation, content manipulation, and that comes up in a lot of cases, including in Net Choice in the Supreme Court. But this case is different because it involves something that's happening abroad. And what we're worried about is the effect of something that happens abroad. And when it's a foreign organization, they don't have a First Amendment right to object to a regulation of their curation.
Well, a couple of answers to that, Your Honor, if I can walk through them. I think the first step is TikTok Inc. is a U.S. entity that engages in speech. It curates third-party content, just as the Net Choice, and it engages in its own speech. So the speech here that's being banned, we would say, or at the minimum burdened, is the speech of a U.S. speaker. I think the government tries to argue that because TikTok Inc. ultimately has a foreign owner, that somehow affects whether TikTok Inc., the U.S. entity, has First Amendment rights. That can't possibly.
I don't think they're arguing that. I think what they're saying is TikTok Inc. may well have First Amendment rights and does, but TikTok Inc. can continue to curate to its heart's content. But what it can't do is do that while it's owned by China.
The Washington Times writing about the case, quote, China-owned TikTok argued before a seemingly skeptical three-judge panel in Washington Monday that an impending ban on the popular social media platform's operations in the United States runs afoul of the First Amendment. Also presenting in court was Jeffrey Fisher. He was representing a group of prominent TikTok users who also filed a lawsuit challenging the law. Here's part of his exchange with Judge Douglas Ginsburg.
The creator's fundamental submission in this case is that wholly independent of TikTok and the company's interests that are at play here, the act here directly implicates the First Amendment rights of American speakers to speak, associate, and listen to free expression in this country. Any other holding would prevent American writers from publishing in Politico or Al Jazeera, would prohibit American musical artists from posting their music on Swedish-owned Spotify, or would prevent American filmmakers, allow Congress to prevent American filmmakers from creating documentaries to be edited and aired on the BBC. Our arguments on the compelling interest and narrow tailoring side of the case do parallel TikTok's to a great extent, but I do want to emphasize that the government's content manipulation rationale is wholly illegitimate and invalid and anathema to the First Amendment, and it itself taints the entire act. If you could, as Chief Judge Srinivasan hypothesized, isolate just the data privacy, that itself would also be not a compelling interest and not narrowly tailored. Taking a step back, it is truly striking.
What is the creator's interest in that aspect of the case?
In the data privacy aspect of the case? Yeah. Well, the creator's interest here is the First Amendment right to publish and coordinate with their publisher of choice, as in the net choice sense of TikTok. And so if you work all the way down through strict scrutiny to the government's purported interests, we think the data security interest is invalid for a couple of reasons. And I can walk through
We're talking about the concern of the government with hoovering up all the information about American users, including your speakers. Right?
Right. So we just think that is an insufficient justification to satisfy certainly strict scrutiny, and even if we were in a world of intermediate scrutiny, and for a couple of reasons. One is, as the company has elaborated in its briefing, the government's arguments themselves are overblown. Geolocational information is not gathered to the extent the government asserts. Contact lists are not given to the company unless the users opt into that. And in general, there's a real problem with the government's data security argument, particularly from my client's standpoint, because those are voluntary acts.
On the other side, attorney Daniel Tenney, representing the Justice Department, here's part of his exchange with Judge Srinivasan.
What is being targeted is a foreign company that controls this recommendation engine and many aspects of the algorithm that's used to determine what content is shown to Americans on the app. And I think there was a quotation read from the declarations, from petitioners' declarations before, about how that continues to happen in China rather than in the United States. If you just read those declarations through, you'll find lots of them. There's really no dispute here that the recommendation engine is maintained, developed, written by ByteDance rather than by TikTok US. And that is what's being targeted. So when the petitioners say, as they repeatedly did this morning, that this is targeting expression, to the extent that it's targeting expression, which isn't the exclusive thing, but if you call the covert manipulation of content expression, which may be under net choice, if an American company was doing it, you would. But if you're going to call that expression, it is not expression by Americans in America. It is expression by Chinese engineers in China.
So maybe we're going to the same place, but you've helpfully isolated what seems to me to be doing all the work from the government's perspective, because under net choice, if we were talking about a US company, that's heartland First Amendment, protected curation. That's just what net choice says. So if everything under the government's perspective turns on the fact that ByteDance is subject to Chinese control, right? Because if it was US control, that's net choice. That raises a serious First Amendment question. And then when the way net choice did it, the rationale would be related to the suppression of free expression. And let me just add one thing, take out the data security. I know that that's in the case, but just for purposes of this part of the analysis, just take that out and let's just focus on the content. What the government itself rightly characterizes as content manipulation. Once you put an interest in play that's called content manipulation, that sets off First Amendment alarm bells in the normal situation when you don't have foreign control in play.
I think I mostly agree with that statement, but I do have some caveats. I mean, it's not just a question of control or ownership. I mean, this is being done by ByteDance. It's not just, we're not, I mean, I think we would have arguments and we might well win, and I don't mean to suggest otherwise. If the covert content manipulation that we were concerned about were done by TikTok US subject to the oversight of ByteDance, I think we would have strong arguments there. And again, I'm not trying to give away that case, but I'm just telling you that's not the case that you've got, because what we're talking about,
I'm giving you that.
is that this is what's done by ByteDance outside the United States. And the other side makes a big deal about the fact that the code is sort of deployed in the United States in the sense that the source code is written in China and then it's posted, or I mean, it's a little metaphysical to describe what it means for it to be quote unquote in the United States if it's in the cloud. But I mean, the core point that we're making is the one that they've conceded, which is that this code is written in China, and the determinations about how it should be changed, how it should be altered, which they say they do 1,000 times a day. They push up a new update. All of that is done in China, and it is. And I understood them to be weakly suggesting that.
I'm giving you all that. I'm just assuming for these purposes that you're right on all that. That it's all the relevant stuff is going on in China. My only point is that if that relevant stuff was going on in the U.S., that's a big problem for the government under net choice.
If the government were targeting the curation of content in the United States by U.S. actors, that would be net choice. And
right. What you're doing is you're targeting curation. You're targeting curation in the same way. It's just that the curation that's being targeted is happening abroad at the behest of a foreign adversary.
Right, with the caveat that there's other rationales too.
Yes,
that you
focusing on
discussed.
this.
Yes,
So
that's absolutely right.
The law at issue here is known as the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. It passed Congress with bipartisan support in the spring. President Biden signed it in April. In May, TikTok and its owner ByteDance sued the federal government and asked the Federal Appeals Court for an injunction to block the ban on TikTok. The Washington Times report today said, quote, no matter how the judges from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rule, it's expected the case will eventually be appealed to the Supreme Court. You can hear the entire oral argument at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. President Biden spoke at the 2024 National HBCU Week Conference in Philadelphia today, and he announced $1.3 billion in new federal investments for U.S. historically black colleges and universities.
I'm also proud to lead the first administration in history to have a working group from the Divine Nine in the White House. Oh, I got it, man. I mean, maybe a white boy, but I ain't stupid. I figured out real quick. And by the way, it's an official group in the White House. Together, we got to work right away with our signature investment in addressing one of the most pressing issues for HBCUs. We all know, and I mean this sincerely, that HBCU students are just as capable as any other students. No, but HBCUs don't have the endowments like many other colleges and universities that are able to fund research labs, improve campus infrastructure, and so much more. That's why I'm proud to be delivering on a record $17 billion. $17 billion for HBCUs, the most ever any administration has ever committed.
According to a White House fact sheet, HBCUs comprise only 3% of U.S. colleges and universities, but they provide access to twice as many Pell Grant eligible low and middle income students as non-HBCU institutions. And Reuters writing today that National Economic Council Chair Lael Brainerd declared, quote, that the U.S. economy had turned the corner in bringing down inflation, and it was now time to focus on safeguarding recent progress in the labor market. Here she is speaking with Blair Efron, co-founder of Centerview Partners, during an event at the Council on Foreign Relations.
What we certainly learned, if we didn't know it at the time, is when you see really once in 100-year shocks, we should be very cautious about extrapolating from previous episodes. The 1970s, 1980s wage price spiral was just a bad analogy for a host of reasons, including that inflation expectations are very strongly anchored today in a way that they weren't. But it was also very clear that these shocks were very protracted, but they were in fact shocks, and they did in fact dissipate over time. And so I think if we had taken very seriously the notion that you simply couldn't get inflation back down without massively suppressing growth and hiring, it would have cost American households, American businesses, enormous progress that we've actually seen. Instead, by focusing on shoring up balance sheets, making sure people could stay in their homes, get back to work, make sure that we rebuilt the childcare system, make sure that those supply chains got fixed. And in terms of the role of the private sector, hand in glove on all of these challenges, right? So we could not have gotten the ships moving through Los Angeles port and moved goods to stores without a partnership between actually business, labor, and government that proved to be very, very powerful. If you look at the investments we're making, those investments are $900 billion worth of private capital being deployed to the clean energy transition and to semiconductors, and benefiting in turn from the infrastructure. The small business, 19 million applications, I mean, that is a sign of just how much dynamism we can unleash in our economy. So it's really a partnership.
Their comments come just 2 days before Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is expected to announce a cut in interest rates. You can see all of President Biden's comments today in Philadelphia and Chair Brainard's comments at the Council on Foreign Relations at cspan.org and on our free mobile video app, C-SPAN Now. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
If you ever miss any of C-SPAN's coverage, you can find it anytime online at cspan.org. Videos of key hearings, debates, and other events feature markers that guide you to interesting and newsworthy highlights. These points of interest markers appear on the right-hand side of your screen when you hit play on select videos. This timeline tool makes it easy to quickly get an idea of what was debated and decided in Washington. Scroll through and spend a few minutes on C-SPAN's points of interest.